All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the chill stream. Welcome. Good to see you, Mr. Malloy and Michael Hagan. Good to see you, love. Okay, so how is everyone? I'm going to give everyone another minute or two to start straggling in here because I just don't want to restart it as soon as we get going. And that always happens no matter what. Knock on wood, it does. It always happens. But good to see you, gentlemen. And ladies, hopefully some ladies will pop in. Oh yay, right when I said it. Hi Lex, how are you, lovey? I can see that. I'm in the friend zone. True that. And I'm good. How are you? How's your day? I hope it was good. Palm reading. Did a horrible palm reading. Oh my gosh, it was hot like everywhere today. You're in California like me, so I totally get it. So hold on, did you do another palm reading besides Grandma's house? Did you? Okay, hold on. I'm gonna share my screen. Hold please. Trucker John, welcome. So far, she's the only person I did a palm reading just for Grandma's house. I thought you did others. Oh, it's so funny you say that, Lex, because literally, that's like my thing. I'm like, I'm melting whenever I'm out in the sun for too long. Literally, I start to melt. Oh, Maddie's here. We can start now. Okay, I'm here. You can start now. I'm gonna test the volume on here. I think I unmuted it. Let me know if you guys can hear, just real quick.
Development of events beyond a person's control. And certainly, what can be said to be a horrible fate isn't always synonymous with someone's tragic passing. So, in this
Okay, let me know if the volume was good, please and thank you. So, if you are new here, thank you. Welcome for being here. If you're not new here, welcome back. Normally, I would be doing readings right now, but from time to time, I do like a little show stream, and there's like certain shows we'll watch. Horrible Fates or Sean's channel, Scary Interesting, is one that I like religiously follow. So I'll drop his link in chat. That way, you guys can sub up to him. I just did so. Okay, was the volume okay? Let me know. Give me a thumbs up, and I'll start it. But yeah, so this is a collection of horrible fates. What number is this one? 24. And it's if you've never seen it before, don't worry. It's not like you have to like follow it from the first one. They're all independent of one another, so don't worry about that. Okay, I'm like in 100% agreement here, Lex. Okay, so Michael Hagan told me volume's good, so I'm gonna make myself smaller and make this bigger. I'm gonna make it bigger. Make bigger. Okay, everyone ready to roll? Give me another thumbs up and we'll get going. I don't know if I said that already, or I was just asking about the volume, but we're about to start. I've been holding off a whole 24 hours from watching this, so I'm like excited to see this one. The last one was so good. Like seriously, do you remember the last one, Malloy? It was so good. It was like good as in bad, but it was a good one. You know what I mean. All right, so let's start it.
Fate is defined as the development of events beyond a person's control. And certainly, what can be said to be a horrible fate isn't always
Again, I did say that this is Sean from Scary Interesting, and I did drop his link. I'll do it a few times in chat, but that's whose channel this is from.
synonymous with someone's tragic passing. So in this, fate is defined as the development of events beyond a person's control. And certainly, what can be said to be a horrible fate isn't always synonymous with someone's tragic passing. So in this video, we're going to look at some wildly strange circumstances that I think you'll find are truly horrible. As always, viewer discretion is advised. Martin Pistorius was born to Joan and Rodney Pistorius on the last day of December in 1975. He was bright and charismatic even as a toddler and developed a passion for computers and electronics early on. Before his 10th birthday, he built an alarm system to warn him when his brother got into his Legos. Then at 11, he safely repaired a broken electrical socket in the family's home. At that point in time, it looked like he had an incredibly bright future ahead of him. But then only a year later, when he was 12, Martin came home from school one day with a headache and a worsening fever. Martin's family initially assumed he'd just come down with a severe but otherwise regular flu. That night, he slept in the fetal position until the following morning, and then when he woke up, rather than getting better, his condition had worsened and he completely refused to eat. Then, over the course of the day, he became sicker and more lethargic, which again wouldn't be too uncommon for the flu, but then he had a series of severe and profuse nosebleeds. It was at this point that his parents worried that this was more than just a flu and brought him to the hospital. Doctors first checked for common sicknesses and vitamin deficiencies, but these turned up nothing. Then they ran a series of more specific tests, and one of the more obscure tests they ran came back positive for something known as cryptococcal meningitis. This is a rare fungal infection that causes inflammation in the brain and central nervous system. Martin's parents didn't really know what to make of it, and all they could really do was hold out hope that doctors would be able to stop the potentially serious illness in its tracks. But despite round-the-clock treatment, Martin's condition continued to worsen, and slowly he lost all motor skills, then the ability to speak, and then he slipped into a coma. And once he was in the coma, doctors told his parents that the odds of him regaining consciousness were slim to none. Under the circumstances, the best they could do was take him home and make him as comfortable as possible until he passed away. Everyone assumed this would come swiftly, but even in the meantime, the family's lives were thrown into chaos. Each night, Martin's father woke up every 2 hours to turn Martin so he wouldn't get painful bed sores. Then he'd get up at 5 a.m., dress Martin, load him into the car, and drive him to a special care center where he'd spend the next 8 hours. After a long day of work, he'd pick him up, drive him back home, bathe him, feed him, and put him to bed, after which the process would start all over again. This grueling schedule continued for 2 years, during which time Martin was completely immobile and unconscious. But then, unbeknownst to anyone, a slow recovery began in the early 90s when Martin was 15 or 16 years old. Initially, he was only able to sense people moving around in his room and talking, but soon enough, in addition to hearing, he also regained the ability to understand discussions going on around him. In this conscious state, without anyone realizing it was happening, Martin was learning about major historical events, like that Nelson Mandela had been sworn in as South Africa's first black president in the spring of 1994, and that Princess Diana had died in a car crash in the summer of 1997. Unfortunately, although Martin's brain was undergoing a remarkable awakening, he still couldn't move his body even slightly, so everyone assumed that his condition was no.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this correctly, this kind of reminds me of sleep paralysis. This is weird. So he could understand, like he was taking in information around him, but he couldn't move, talk, or like show any recognition that he like could hear. That's so crazy. Ooh. Oh, that gave me the chills.
It was no different than it had been when he slipped into the coma. By then, the stress, uncertainty, and sleepless nights had taken their toll on his family. This was particularly true for his mother Joan, who started to crack under the immense pressure. One day, when she had reached the absolute limit of devastation and exhaustion, and with no end in sight, she sat by her son's bedside and said out loud that she hoped he died. She didn't know it at the time, but Martin heard and understood those horrible words that were uttered by the one person who should have loved him more than anyone else. At that moment, he felt totally hopeless and totally alone. To make matters worse, a few of the staff members at the care center were neglecting him and treating him poorly both verbally and physically. In one instance, he was given tea which was scalding hot and burned his throat. In another, he was left unattended in a freezing bath for what seemed like an eternity. He was also often parked in front of a TV which played nothing but Barney reruns for hours on end. Thankfully, a few of the caregivers were kind and patient, but he was still trapped in an unimaginable mental prison. Eventually, to pass the time and cope with the incredible boredom, he began having conversations with imaginary people, much like a young child would do. Then, one evening, as his father got him ready for bed, Martin felt like his heart was about to pound out of his chest. He wanted to scream at the top of his lungs to tell his father that he was alive and aware, but he couldn't, and his father just kept going.
Right, this poor thing. Can you picture, picture being, literally this reminds me of sleep paralysis, like so much. And to be like, so I'm thinking of being stuck in that state for like an indefinite amount of time and then being treated so badly and being depressed. That's crazy. Oh, this is a crazy story. Lex, you're mad, huh? Right? These people. I can't believe his mom said that too. Even if she thought it and was just frustrated, why would you say that in front of him? Oh my gosh. Yikes. Okay.
Bath for what seemed like an eternity. He was also often parked in front of a TV which played nothing but Barney reruns for hours on end. Thankfully, a few of the caregivers were kind and patient, but he was still trapped in an unimaginable mental prison.
Good to see you.
Eventually, to pass the time and cope with the incredible boredom, he began having conversations with imaginary people, much like a young child would do. Then, one evening, as his father got him ready for bed, Martin felt like his heart was about to pound out of his chest. He wanted to scream at the top of his lungs to tell his father that he was alive and aware, but he couldn't, and his father just kept going through the motions as if he was on autopilot. Then, the worst reality of all hit home. He was still a very young man, and if his body held out, he might spend another 5, 6, or even 7 decades trapped like this. In the end, this became too much to bear, and he taught himself to tune out of reality entirely. Unfortunately, deep down, he knew that this was only a short-term solution to what might be a long-term problem. What he needed was something positive to occupy his mind, something that could give him a sense of worth, and more importantly, some control in a world where very little existed. He started by teaching himself to tell the time by tracking the sunlight as it moved across the room. It didn't happen overnight, but this simple ritual helped Martin regain some control and re-examine his situation. Eventually, he even accepted what his mother said because he was able to see the situation from her perspective. He realized that when she looked at him, she only saw a lifeless, empty shell where there had once been an active, affectionate, and intelligent son. As time went on, Martin continued to regain consciousness and the use of his body, but improvements came in painfully small increments. Nonetheless, he persisted and soon was able to make small movements with his eyes and fingers that he hoped would eventually be seen by his parents or caregivers. Martin knew it was a long shot, but then one day it finally happened. A therapist named Verna noticed what she thought were small reactions when she spoke to him. Initially, she wasn't sure if she'd actually seen something or just imagined it, but she told Martin's doctors anyway, and they agreed to send him to the University of Pretoria's Center for Augmentative and Alternative Communications for a thorough analysis. Martin was 25 when he arrived at the University of Pretoria, and by then, he'd been trapped in an unconscious state for more than a decade.
No!
Shortly after his arrival, doctors
God,
confirmed what Vernites suspected, that Martin was aware. His mother promptly quit her job and dedicated herself to aiding his recovery in any way.
10 years? Picture being stuck in sleep paralysis for 10 years. This is insane. Wow. Okay, sorry. This is like crazy to me.
Way possible. His family then bought him a computer alternative communications for a thorough analysis. Martin was 25 when he arrived at the University of Pretoria, and by then, he'd been trapped in an unconscious state for more than a decade. Shortly after his arrival, doctors confirmed what Vernites suspected, that Martin was aware. His mother promptly quit her job and dedicated herself to aiding his recovery in any way possible. His family then bought him a computer with specialized text-to-speech software that allowed Martin to communicate effectively for the first time since he was a teenager. Initially, he could only manage simple statements like, "I'm cold" or "I want toast," but it was still far better than the prison he was in before. And then eventually, he mastered the new form of communication, and with an electric wheelchair and slowly improving motor skills, he even landed a job filing papers at a government office. Incredibly, that was just the beginning. Martin later started his own web design firm, went to college, and met an Englishwoman named Joanna, who he married in 2009. He was still confined to a wheelchair and couldn't speak, but he and Joanna moved to the UK later that year. Since then, he's co-written an account of his harrowing ordeal called Ghost Boy, which was published in 2011. He also spoke at a TEDx event in the US and was featured on a national public radio podcast, and in December of 2018, his wife gave birth to a healthy baby boy. It's not clear why Martin awoke from his coma when he did, but without Verna's care and attention, he thinks he still might be wasting away in that care center.
He had babies? Okay, I gotta rewind this a smidge. No one yell at me. I missed that part for some reason. Distracted, sorry.
That was just the beginning. Martin later started his own web design firm, went to college, and met an Englishwoman named Joanna, who he married in 2009. He was still confined to a wheelchair and couldn't speak, but he and Joanna moved to the UK later that year. Since then, he's co-written an account of his harrowing ordeal called Ghost Boy, which was published in 2011. He also spoke at a TEDx event in the US and was featured on a national public radio podcast, and in December of 2018, his wife gave birth to a healthy baby boy.
Aww.
It's not clear why Martin awoke from his coma when he did, but without Verna's care and attention, he thinks he still might be wasting away in that care center. Cameron Robbins was born in Abilene, Texas on November 1st, 2004. A few days later, he was adopted by a loving family from Louisiana.
Hi, Aria. Good to see you, lovey. Okay, so this is the next story. You guys, that first story was insane. Straight up insane. Like the Blade Runner that off his girlfriend. What are you talking about, Maddie? What are you talking about? Okay, hold on. Let me rewind this a tad, because this is the next story. Okay.
Care and attention, he thinks he still might be wasting away in that care center.
Okay, so this is a different one.
Cameron Robbins was born in Abilene, Texas on November 1st, 2004. A few days later, he was adopted by a loving family from Louisiana that raised him for the next 18 years. It's not clear why he didn't stay with his biological family, but by all accounts, he adapted quickly to his new life and surroundings. Cameron began attending the University Lab School in Baton Rouge as a kindergartner and studied there until graduating from high school on May 21st of this year. Known for his perpetual smile, positive attitude, and unruly hair, Cameron was a diligent and well-liked student. He was also a 3-year varsity letterman on the school's baseball team, who often played with injuries that would have sidelined less dedicated teammates. After graduating and to enjoy one last celebration before moving on to the next stage of their lives, Cameron and his friend group from school signed up for a trip to the Bahamas. It wasn't an official school event, but nearly everyone stayed together in the Atlantis Paradise Resort in Nassau anyway. On the evening of May 24th, Cameron and his friends boarded a 500-ton Spanish galleon replica and set off on what was supposed to be a fun, safe, and memorable cruise. According to the company that owns the boat, it's the only pirate-themed charter in the Bahamas. However, it's one of many similar so-called booze cruises that cater to travelers who aren't old enough to drink in their home countries. Since the legal drinking age in the Bahamas is just 18, many of these booze cruise tickets often include alcohol. Nobody knows how much Cameron and his friends had to drink that night, but at just after 9:30 p.m., someone dared him to jump off the boat and into the water. Unfortunately, Cameron
This is gonna be one of those, right? Like I double dog dared him.
to travelers who aren't old enough to drink in their home countries. Since the legal drinking age in the Bahamas is just 18, many of these booze cruise tickets often include alcohol. Nobody knows how much Cameron and his friends had to drink that night, but at just after 9:30 p.m., someone dared him to jump off the boat and into the water. Unfortunately, Cameron definitely wasn't one to back down from a challenge. Even worse, he may not have known that the warm waters around the Bahamas are home to a number of species of shark, one of which is the tiger shark, which is second only to the white shark for the number of attacks on humans. Whether or not he was oblivious to the dangers lurking below or just wasn't thinking clearly due to the alcohol he'd consumed, Cameron accepted the dare.
Oh, I think I know
Pretty
what you're
quickly,
talking
he
about
stripped
now,
down to
Matt.
his boxer shorts, gave his friends a quick goodbye, and then jumped from the boat just off the coast of Atoll Island, northeast of Nassau. After splashing down in the water, Cameron resurfaced just a few meters away from the side of the ship. Within moments, the crew initiated the man overboard protocol, and someone tossed a life ring into the water for him to grab onto, and immediately other people on board yelled for him to swim to the life ring. Down in the water, Cameron didn't reply and seemed to be focused on a silver figure disturbing the water just a few feet in front of him. Whatever it was, Cameron seemed to be looking directly at it. In the next second, he turned away from whatever it was in the water and started going in the opposite direction, but not toward the life ring either. At the same time, with the boat still moving, Cameron was quickly becoming smaller and smaller in the distance. This was the last time Cameron was ever seen. As soon as he was out of view, the boat, which was previously loud and celebrating, went completely silent. The incident was quickly reported to the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, but it wasn't until 11:30 p.m. when they contacted the U.S. Coast Guard headquarters in Miami to start a search. Right away, they deployed boats and aircraft that collectively searched a 300 square mile area for multiple days, during which no trace of Cameron was ever found. The Royal Bahamas Defense Force officially halted its search and rescue operations on May 27th, and the U.S. Coast Guard continued searching for a little while longer, but it called off its efforts as well a few weeks later. After his disappearance, the shark attack theory gained momentum when a video of the incident began showing up online and in news broadcasts. It does make for a more dramatic story, but many marine biologists and oceanographers don't think he had an encounter with a shark or any other large predator because despite these animals living in the water, attacks are still exceedingly rare. In fact, there were only 4 shark attacks reported in the Bahamas between 2006 and 2016, and only one of them was fatal. At the same time, however, it's well known that fish tend to congregate around boats like the one Cameron jumped off of because food and other edible waste is often tossed overboard. It's possible that Cameron entered the water at a particularly inopportune time when a large, hungry shark just happened to be in the area looking for smaller fish to eat. Another factor worth considering is the water temperature, which was somewhere between 75 and 82 Fahrenheit, or between 23 and 27 Celsius that evening. Even though the low end of that range might sound warm enough, hypothermia can't be ruled out because the water was significantly cooler than Cameron's internal temperature. In addition, the alcohol in his system would have caused his blood vessels to dilate and caused his body to cool down more quickly. Finally, it's possible that he simply succumbed to exhaustion as he waited for rescue and eventually was no longer able to tread water. In the end, it's hard to say exactly what happened to Cameron, other than that his last moments treading water in the dark ocean had to be truly terrifying. Imagine being so ravenous.
That was it? I mean, what? I'm like half satisfied with that story. What happened to him? Just nothing? OMG. That one was a little less than like, I'm like, what happened? Okay, so let me throw it back.
Exhaustion as he waited for rescue and eventually was no longer able to tread water. In the end, it's hard to say exactly what happened to Cameron, other than that his last moments treading water in the dark ocean had to be truly terrifying. Imagine being so ravenous that no amount of food could satisfy your hunger. At the same time, imagine being hopelessly poor and having to consume everything from stones and
Okay, so Listrin. The first story was super good. So maybe like when the live's over, go back and watch that one. This last one though wasn't all that good. And then we just barely started the third one. Like it literally just started. So you missed 2 stories. The shark got him. That's what happened. You're probably right. I mean, I wouldn't doubt it. Awesome stories. Sus for sure. Yes, it took me a minute to figure out like who Maddie was talking about, but it clicked. I think I heard a little bit about that story. Okay, so I'm gonna throw it back just in case.
ocean
But it did
had to be
literally just
truly
start.
terrifying. Imagine being so ravenous that no amount of food could satisfy your hunger. At the same time, imagine being hopelessly poor and having to consume everything from stones and garbage to medical waste and live animals just to fill your empty stomach. Believe it or not, this was the life of a Frenchman named Terrer.
I'm gonna throw
Terrer was born sometime around 1772, and even as a child, he had an appetite of epic proportions. Already, by the time he was a teenager, he could eat close to his weight in beef in a single day, and his parents could no longer afford to feed him. This forced him to leave home and move to Paris in the late 1780s, after which times were tough, and he quickly fell in with a group of performers, beggars, and pickpockets who roamed the city's streets. Soon enough, though, Terrer realized that people would pay to watch him eat all sorts of odd and inedible objects. This apparently included stones, corks, live animals, and even an entire basket full of apples swallowed whole, one after the other. Some of these specific instances may have been fabricated or embellished over time, but there's little doubt that Terrer regularly ate enormous quantities. As his father got him ready for bed, Martin felt like effort from something as simple as hyperthyroid, such bad body odor that no one could stand. Also seemed to have the ability to keep nearly every. At the same time, imagine being hopeless.
OMG, Maddie totally threw me off. It's Maddie's fault because he said medical waste question mark. I guess so. Okay, I think they did say that. I think so. Ugh.
Hopelessly poor and having to consume everything from stones and garbage to medical waste and live animals just to fill your empty stomach. Believe it or not, this was the life of a Frenchman named Terrer. Terrer was born sometime around 1772, and even as a child, he had an appetite of epic proportions. Already, by the time he was a teenager, he could eat close to his weight in beef in a single day, and his parents could no longer afford to feed him. This forced him to leave home and move to Paris in the late 1780s, after which times were tough, and he quickly fell in with a group of performers, beggars, and pickpockets who roamed the city's streets. Soon enough, though, Terrer realized that people would pay to watch him eat all sorts of odd and inedible objects. This apparently included stones, corks, live animals, and even an entire basket full of apples swallowed whole, one after the other. Some of these specific instances may have been fabricated or embellished over time, but there's little doubt that Terrer regularly ate enormous quantities of odd items. Unsurprisingly, on several occasions, this landed him in hospitals with severe intestinal issues that could only be treated with harsh laxatives. But Terrer was resilient and always managed to recover, and his bizarre condition stayed with him throughout his life and never seemed to give him a moment's peace. Although there aren't any pictures of him, he's said to have had particularly soft hair and relatively normal facial features. He also had a massive tongue, a huge jaw that opened like a trapdoor, and an oversized mouth nearly 4 inches wide. Supposedly, Terrer's stretched out cheeks could hold a dozen eggs or nearly as many apples, but he couldn't gain weight no matter what or how much he ate.
Really?
And although he only weighed 100 pounds at the age of 17, loose skin hung in great folds around his jowls and midsection when his stomach wasn't full. He would then inflate almost like a balloon after gorging himself on whatever he could find. Afterward, he'd become extremely lethargic and fall into a deep sleep, during which he'd make chewing and swallowing motions with his mouth while passing noxious gas from both ends. He also seemed to have the ability to keep nearly everything down without vomiting, but struggled with chronic diarrhea that one doctor described as fetid beyond all conception. In addition, he was known to sweat profusely and have such bad body odor that no one could stand to be anywhere near him. Apparently, these conditions also became far worse after he'd eaten. At the same time, Terrer didn't exhibit any other unusual behavior, and his insatiable appetite, body odor, and fine hair suggest that he might have suffered from something as simple as hyperthyroidism. Another theory is that he might have had polyphagia caused by a damaged amygdala, which is a part of the brain. Polyphagia sufferers also tend to have constant hunger that no amount of food seems to satiate. Like many young Frenchmen, Terrer joined the Revolutionary Army when the War of the First Coalition broke out in 1792, but life in the army was difficult, largely because he never got enough to eat. His military rations didn't make even the slightest dent in his appetite, so he resorted to doing odd jobs for other soldiers in exchange for a portion of their food. But again, even this wasn't enough, and he often resorted to eating discarded food scraps, garbage, and whatever else he could find. In a matter of months, his health deteriorated to such an extent that he was given 4 times the standard rations. And despite this, he was eventually admitted to a hospital because even this didn't provide the energy necessary for him to carry out even basic tasks. Eventually, 2 of the army's physicians became fascinated with his case and set out to figure out exactly what was going on. Their first task was to determine whether or not this was real or if he was making it up to avoid being sent to the front lines. To test their theory, they presented Terrer with a meal that had been prepared for over a dozen laborers. They reasoned that if he could eat 2 large meat pies and 4 gallons of milk meant for 15 men without vomiting, it would prove that they were dealing with a genuine medical condition. Unsurprisingly, Terrer devoured every bit of the meal in record time and then went on to swallow a bunch of cooking grease in addition to the rest of the food and promptly fell into a deep sleep. With enough rest and abundant food, Terrer eventually made a partial recovery, and the doctors allowed him to remain in the hospital long after his condition improved. Unfortunately, soldiers were in short supply, and Terrer's superiors requested that he be released for general service. Since the doctor wasn't crazy about losing his most interesting patient, he came up with a plan that would allow him to continue his observations while also taking advantage of Terrer's unusual circumstances. His plan was to have him eat a small wooden box containing a written message. If the contents passed through his digestive system intact, Terrer could be used to deliver sensitive messages near the front lines or maybe even in enemy territory. And even if he was captured, there was almost no chance of this hidden message falling into the wrong hands. To demonstrate this idea, the doctor had Terrer eat a wooden box with a message inside in front of a number of high-ranking officers, after which he was rewarded with a wheelbarrow full of raw bull organs that he devoured completely. 2 days later, when he passed the box, the commanders were pleased to discover that the message was still perfectly legible. Terrer was then tasked with carrying an important message to a French colonel who'd been captured by the Prussians. When it was time to leave, he dressed as a German peasant, ate the box, and crossed into Prussia under the cover of darkness. Unfortunately, his inability to speak the native language quickly aroused suspicions, and he was promptly captured by Prussian authorities.
That is so gross that he pooped that box out, or the note, or whatever. It's so gross. Like, that is so gross. Ew. It's so freaking gross.
Authorities. Initially, he didn't reveal his mission despite harsh interrogation methods, and since nothing incriminating was found in his possession, authorities had little to go on. He was, however, sent to prison for further questioning, and he eventually cracked in just a few days after becoming frantic with hunger. Terrer was then chained to a latrine while they waited for the box to pass. When it did, the Prussians supposedly opened it up and found that the message was actually a dummy message that was only supposed to be a confirmation that their plan would work. Other sources claim that Terrer passed the box while his guards were busy with other duties and that he re-ate it before it could be retrieved. Whatever the case, he was sentenced to death and taken to the gallows. In a last-minute decision, though, the commander decided that he would only receive a beating instead, after which time he was released back near the French front line. After having barely escaped death in enemy territory, Terrer was determined to avoid further military service at all costs. After entering France, he went straight to the hospital and told the doctor that he'd subject himself to any test or radical cure as long as he didn't have to be a soldier. The doctor agreed and wanted to try anything and everything like tobacco pills or strict diets of boiled eggs and vinegar, but nothing worked. During this time, Terrer was forbidden from eating anything other than what was fed to him, but he often snuck out of his room to scavenge garbage piles or butcher shop waste bins. On more than one occasion as well, he was caught inside the hospital drinking blood from bloodletting patients and suspiciously entering the morgue. The doctor remained hopeful that he could find some sort of cure, but his colleagues were convinced that Terrer should be permanently locked away in an asylum. He did manage to convince them for a time that the condition was physiological and that a cure could be found, but this was then quickly abandoned when a 14-month-old child disappeared from the hospital under mysterious circumstances. It's unclear whether or not Terrer had anything to do with this,
Did
but
he
at about
eat
the
the
same
baby,
time,
y'all?
he fled the hospital and never returned.
That's horrible.
Years
He ate
later,
that
in
baby.
1798, the
I'm
doctor was
afraid.
informed by a colleague that Terrer was at a hospital in Versailles
And
and,
of
that he
course,
was in very
welcome
poor
to
condition and wanted to see him. When the doctor arrived, Terrer told him that he'd swallowed a gold fork 2 years earlier and that he believed it was lodged somewhere in his digestive system. The doctor examined him,
Seriously.
thinking the fork was the issue, but
This is
upon
so
further
weird.
examination, realized that Terrer was suffering from advanced tuberculosis, from which there would be
Maddie.
no recovery. Terrer passed away a few months later after a bout of diarrhea that left him bedridden, weak, and severely dehydrated. The doctor's colleague went on to perform an autopsy because he was curious about what he might find. The autopsy did reveal that Terrer's mouth and throat were much wider than normal. In addition to that, his body looked as if it was in a permanent state of infection for years. His gallbladder and liver were abnormally large, and his stomach was massive and covered in ulcers. In the end, the autopsy didn't reveal the cause of Terrer's condition, the gold fork was never found, and the legend of Terrer still lives on more than 2 centuries after his death. Hello everyone, my name is Sean and welcome to Scary Interesting. If you enjoyed this video,
No, they didn't say he ate the baby, Michael Hagan. I can't with y'all though. I know that Maddie said it. It's so horrible. Like, why make him eat all this stuff? It's so. I really hope he didn't eat that baby. I mean, dead serious. Oh my gosh, it's so weird. Like, what was the point of making him eat the box with the note? Like, why? It's just like, I don't get it. Oh, okay. We got one more to watch. Hold, please. Just one more. Listrid said, I have cousins that don't ever fulfill. They're not this bad though. Yeah, this guy seems like definitely an extreme. Like for sure. Eva, good to see you, lovey. My aunt had to lock up all the food when they were young. Utah is keeping me awake. I cannot sleep very well in this state. Damn it, Utah. Way too many partying Mormons. I love that. That's funny. One time she wanted to see how much one would eat as a baby. She fed him a ton. He threw up, then immediately asked for more. Ugh. OMG. Oh my gosh, Listrin, that's all Malloy talks about is Pioneer Day. Oh, that's so funny you said that. All right, so this is the last one, and then this is bedtime story. So this is a little bit. This is a horrible fate. So nobody's babies are going to be eaten on this one, okay? That I know of. Let me know if you guys can hear it though. Just give me a thumbs up real quick.
There are numerous examples of famous and influential figures who claim to recall past lives. Such stories have often proven easy to refute, with
Hold on, why do I have like a different language? Oh wait, hold on. Let me turn off the CCs. There we go, the subtitles. Could you guys hear though? Okay, let me know. Just give me a thumbs up.
suggestions that those involved
Robin, welcome, Robin. I haven't seen you like I think ever during one of my lives, have I? Maybe like one. It's so good to see you. Welcome, Lovey. Okay, can everyone hear? Okay, yes, no, maybe so. Here's your calm readings. Could everyone hear okay? No one even gave me a thumbs up. Tell me now if you could hear. Not me, but this.
There are numerous examples of famous and influential figures who claim to recall past lives.
Silly goose, are you being a silly goosey? Okay, there we go. This is an interesting one too, considering if you check out my community tab, I just did recently I did what's it called? I did a poll about people and their beliefs on past lives. So this is going to be an interesting one. I should be sleeping, but yes, you can hear me. Okay, lovely, sleep good. All right, onward. And I will drop. I think I did drop the link to this channel, but this is bedtime stories. They're definitely worth the sub.
Such stories have often proven easy to refute, with suggestions that those involved are courting fame or controversy. But such tales prove more difficult to dismiss when the parties involved are small children, expressing thoughts and feelings too advanced for their years, almost as if they have been here before.
Did totally chill here until for anybody.
History is littered with examples of individuals who have displayed what appears to be significant knowledge of an existence prior to their being born. Many famous leaders and politicians have cited events and occurrences which they claim to have recalled from a past existence, with detailed memories which they state have gone on to influence their actions in this life. Tales of this phenomenon have been recounted by such prominent public figures as Benjamin Franklin and Mahatma Gandhi, as well as the noted philosopher Dr. Carl Jung. But perhaps the most notable believer in the concept of reincarnation was the celebrated American World War II general, George Patton. Patton believed that he could recall events from as many as 8 past lives, where he had been a fighting man during conflicts throughout history. These included fighting for Alexander the Great, being a soldier at the Battle of Agincourt under King Henry V, and serving as an aide to the French Marshal Murat during the Napoleonic Wars. In the case of Patton and many other famous believers in reincarnation, such claims have generally been dismissed as pure fiction, created out of a desire for public interest and acclaim. But it is much more difficult to dismiss such testimonies when they come from much younger claimants, some barely old enough to walk and talk, yet they still claim to have memories of a prior adult existence. Over the last 45 years, a team of researchers working out of the University of Georgia have continued to document and investigate examples of alleged child reincarnation. During the course of their research, they came into contact with over 2,500 children, all of whom displayed signs of having lived a past life. In the majority of cases, many of the children recounted unnervingly detailed memories, with physical manifestations of alleged past injuries occurring less frequently. But in addition to being unable to explain how or why the children involved would fabricate such stories, the investigators were shocked to discover that more often than not, their memories seemed to correlate with an existing historical record. The son of a serving police lieutenant, Ryan Hammonds, was born in Oklahoma in 2004. He would turn out to be a late speaker due to enlarged adenoids which would not be removed until he was 4 years old. In the aftermath of this operation, Ryan's parents were surprised by the apparent ease and speed with which their son began to form full words and sentences. But this amazement soon turned to shock as he began to describe vivid details of a life he claimed to have lived prior to being born. The 4-year-old related how he had resided in Hollywood in a large house with a swimming pool and had driven around Los Angeles in a green car. He explained how he had visited the beach with his girlfriends, done business deals with US senators, and enjoyed luxury holidays to European cities such as Paris. In time, Ryan's parents sought help from Dr. Jim Tucker, one of the researchers at the University of Georgia, who quickly made plans to visit the family. Having arrived at their home, Tucker was shown a picture of a man whom Ryan had identified as the person he used to be, which they located during their own research into Hollywood history. The photo in question was from a 1932 film titled Night After Night, starring Mae West and George Raft. The man in the picture appeared to be an unknown extra in the movie. On taking Ryan on a tour of houses in Los Angeles, the boy was able to identify a home he vividly remembered. Research showed that the house had once belonged to an actor named Bill Elliott. This in turn positively identified the man in the photograph as a Hollywood agent named Marty Martin, a friend of Elliott's who had appeared as an extra in Night After Night as a favor. Martin had passed away in 1964, and a closer examination of the film agent's life uncovered a staggering 47 accurate statements which Ryan had made prior to the identification.
So 47 kind of sounds like a lot, but I don't know if it is. I mean, he's how old?
These included that he'd had 3 stepsons and a biological daughter, that he'd done business with New York Senator Irving Ives, and had worked with Hollywood legend Rita Hayworth. During his time working with Ryan, Dr. Tucker asked if he could remember what had happened at the point he had died, with the cause of Martin's death having been recorded as a brain hemorrhage. Ryan replied that he could, and that he had gone to a place of bright light, where everybody went before they came back. He had then waited there until he had chosen his mother as a conduit for his new life. But at the age of 7, before more work could be done with him, Ryan began to show signs of not wanting to recall his prior existence.
Aww.
He began to clear away photographs and articles which provided details of his time as Marty Martin, insisting that he now wanted to move on and live his new life. He remains one of the most detailed and well-documented cases to have been investigated by Dr. Tucker. The detail expressed regarding his past life remains almost impossible to explain away. Another perplexing case which landed on the desk of Jim Tucker and his fellow researchers was that of James Leninger, a boy born in San Francisco during April of 1998. After the family moved to Dallas when he was just 2 years old, young James had been taken for a day trip to the James Cavanaugh Flight Museum in the nearby town of Addison. Noticing that her son had been particularly enthralled by the World War II exhibits on display, Andrea Leninger had sought out a matching toy plane for him to take home as they had left via the museum gift shop. Placing it into his outstretched hands, she had reasoned that this one was particularly special, as it had a bomb attached to the bottom of it. She had then watched in bewilderment as the boy had shaken his head before correcting her. He then told her that what she had assumed was a bomb was in fact a drop tank. Shortly after this, James began to experience night terrors. Running into his room, his parents would find him screaming that he was involved in an air crash, trapped in the cockpit of a falling plane, which was burning.
So I think this is like one of the most notable, or like one of the more notable stories about like a kid like recalling a past life, because I think I've heard this story. I think. Well, I think so.
Over the coming weeks, their son's description of his nightmare became increasingly vivid.
Poor kid too, going through
He
that.
explained that the plane was a Corsair, which had been shot down by a Japanese fighter. Assuming that he must be repeating something he had seen on television, Bruce Leninger had initially humored the boy, only to become disturbed by the intricate detail which his 2-year-old son was adding. James explained that he had been shot down near Iwo Jima, along with another pilot called Jack Larson. They had taken off from a ship named the Natoma. Having bought him more toys to play with, his parents observed as James reenacted air battles, correctly referring to planes he had designated as Japanese fighters by their nicknames of Zeeks and Betties. During these mock dogfights, the toddler began to refer to himself in the third person, stating that he was a US pilot named James III. When Bruce gently inquired as to why he was using that name, the 2-year-old replied that it was because he was the third member of his family to be called James Huston, the same as his father and grandfather. Armed with this information, Bruce began to scour the internet for any historical records which might correspond with his son's story. He was stunned to discover the existence of an American aircraft carrier which had served in the Pacific Campaign, named the USS Natoma Bay. After a lengthy period of deliberation, he proceeded to make contact with the veterans group associated with the vessel, and was allowed to take James along to one of their annual reunions. Almost immediately, the boy began to engage with elderly veterans of the campaign, calling them by their first names and recalling times they had.
Now, how do you explain that away? Like, for him to like just know these people? Do you know what I mean? That's so weird. That's so odd and crazy.
Shared together with a pilot named James Huston Jr. An American fighter pilot by that name had indeed been killed in action near Iwo Jima at the age of 21, having flown a Corsair from the USS Natoma Bay. Even more astounding was that this information was not available anywhere within the public domain. But no sooner had confirmation of James's past life seemingly been obtained than the boy began to withdraw from proceedings, eager to move on from the revelation. Dr. Tucker's study of the case, as it had been with Ryan Hammond's, identified a series of key statements which would have been impossible for the boy to have discovered, as they were unique to the veteran community. He would also note that James's description of his time after death was eerily similar to the Hammond's case: the pursuit of a place of light, followed by a period of waiting before selecting a new mother to be born to. Perhaps the most famous example of children displaying knowledge of a past life did not originate in the United States of America, but instead took place in the northeast of England. In the years following the end of World War II, recently married John and Florence Pollock made the decision to move to the Northumberland town of Hexham and start a family. They were soon blessed with 2 young daughters, Joanna and Jacqueline, who enjoyed playing together in their parents' grocery shop when they were not at school. The girls were happy children, but their mother grew disturbed when at the point Jacqueline learned to speak, she had said that she would never grow up to be a lady. 2 years later, in May of 1957, both girls had been making their way to church with a school friend one morning when they were struck by a passing car. The vehicle was driven by a woman who had recently been separated from her own children and had been prescribed powerful drugs in an effort to cope with this severance.
It's crazy how many stories you hear about like kids or even adults like predicting their own death in like just a roundabout way before it happens. Crazy. It happens, and like I've heard it noted like in so many different instances, like from old stories like this to like even like stories like from like last year. It's crazy how people can kind of predict their own death, or like even like moms. I notice a lot of parents or moms in particular, they'll have like a dream about something happening to their child, and then all of a sudden, okay, sorry, tangent.
To be a lady. 2 years later, in May of 1957, both girls had been making their way to church with a school friend one morning when they were struck by a passing car. The vehicle was driven by a woman who had recently been separated from her own children and had been prescribed powerful drugs in an effort to cope with this severance. All 3 of the girls were killed instantly in an accident which shocked the local community and utterly traumatized their parents. After many months of grieving, the Pollocks made the decision to try for more children, with Florence being told by her doctor the following year that she was pregnant with a single fetus. Her husband was stunned when in October of 1958, Florence gave birth to a pair of twin girls, who they went on to name Gillian and Jennifer. Moving away from Hexham in an effort to escape the pain of the past, they tried to start a new life, only to discover that fate had other ideas. It soon became clear that the twins bore an overwhelming resemblance to their deceased sisters, to a seemingly supernatural degree.
These twins just look.
Jennifer possessed a faint white scar across her forehead and a birthmark to the left side of her waist. Both marks were identical to ones that Jacqueline had been born with. Upon learning to walk, she was instantly drawn to the toys which had belonged to Jacqueline, with Gillian insisting on playing with the ones which had previously been purchased for Joanna. Both girls also became obsessed with hairdressing, just as their deceased siblings had been. But what the Pollocks had assumed was startling coincidence soon developed into a much deeper concern, as their daughter's sleep became disrupted by violent nightmares and visions. They began to wake up screaming, stating that there was a car bearing down on them at speed. This then turned into a wider phobia of cars and roads, the girls refusing to venture out of the house for fear of being struck by a vehicle. One morning, when she was trying to comfort the girls after a particularly vivid nightmare, Florence was horrified to see Gillian reach across and touch Jennifer's forehead before informing her sister that she could see blood pouring from it. Recalling that Jacqueline had passed away as a result of serious head trauma during the collision, Florence broke down, begging her husband to find some way to explain what was taking place. In an effort to confirm his suspicions, John arranged for a day trip back to Hexham. He then watched in amazement as the girls correctly identified places where the family used to live and work, despite having never visited the town before. It would not be until the girls reached the age of 5 that the terrifying dreams and memories which plagued their sleep finally faded away, leaving them to live normal and happy lives. The eerie similarities between the Pollock twins and their deceased older sisters remains one of the most divisive cases of alleged reincarnation on record. Whilst some researchers point to the physical similarities as irrefutable proof of the concept, others point to the desire of the parents to replace their deceased children as the main factor influencing their behavior. Of the 2,500 cases investigated by Dr. Tucker and his team, almost 3/4 resulted in a positive identification of an individual believed to be a previous incarnation of the child involved. More intriguingly, in almost 1/5 of these inquiries, marks or scars were found on the child, which seemingly correlated to injuries or the cause of death in alleged past lives.
Real quick, I had to pause about that because there is this like coordinated thing I've heard a lot of people talk about between past lives and things like birthmarks showing up as like where they had their injuries or how they died. So that's interesting you said that.
Perhaps the most striking of these was a young boy born with 2 large birthmarks at the front and rear of his head, who claimed to have been shot through the eye in a past life. But as compelling as Tucker's research is, the academic community has evolved a slew of psychological explanations for the actions of the children involved. These largely center around children fixating and fantasizing about minor details they've overheard from parents, who then unwittingly contribute further material whilst trying to investigate the matter further. At such a young age, children are exceedingly open to suggestion and have vivid imaginations, sometimes seeing the questioning by their parents as a game or pastime to indulge in. At the same time, parents may wittingly or unwittingly be seeking some form of closure from the exchange, expressing key details which in turn end up being fed back to them. Child reincarnation remains an ongoing area of active research, with arguments for either side of the concept being of equal strength. Perhaps the greatest unanswered question appears to be why the phenomenon only seems to affect children for the first few years of their lives, before then fading away. Does this represent a feeling of closure on their past life, having achieved recognition of its existence from those around them? Or is this simply evidence of the subjects tiring of their fabrications and moving into the next stage of their growth and development? As the fields of medical and psychological research continue to advance, it is entirely possible we may yet find the truth behind this mysterious phenomenon, either in this lifetime or the next.
That was interesting. Let me see what Deepa said. I believe that we're spiritual beings having human experiences so long as a stretch for me neither. It is interesting though about that question about the young age. Even the criticism about maybe parents feeding it like to certain kids. I could, I'd humor that with maybe some of them, but there's seems to be lots of cases, like even the ones that they cited in the episode, where that just wasn't the case. So interesting, very interesting. All right, y'all. So that is the end of the chill stream. Thank y'all for hanging out with me. If you came in late, hit the rewind because the very first one we did was like so incredibly good. You can't like that story was crazy. So I'd recommend rewinding to that first one. And but anywho, I will be back doing readings and all that stuff tomorrow. And I will see y'all then.